What's up, everyone? Tonight we're live with John. Um, and to start off, before we jump in, I want everyone to look into US Arc. They're the frontline defense protecting our rights to keep and breed reptiles. Head to usarc.org and become a member today because without them, the hobby doesn't have a future. And sadly, each year they're pushing more and more on regulations. So, how's your season been going so far, John?
It's good. It's starting to wind down a little bit. I always say like sometimes I'm like a little bit relieved when I watch like females kind of be done, then still waiting, But yeah, it's been a really good year and still a lot to learn and each year there's something new to learn and understand and kind of take with you each season, because this is still kind of new and there's definitely a lot to learn from them.
So, did you? I guess we'll start off like breeding wise. Did you modify much going in, or keep the same system?
Um, well, like so with the blotched, I pretty much kept things the way it's been, consistently working for me. As far as the occipitalis, the Western blue tongues, this year I did change things, and something that I've learned the previous bunch of years, which I wish I kind of adjusted sooner, but I think kind of onto something. So like a lot of times, like a lot of the years, I kept them, I feel too warm, and like I'm understanding like how important it is to keep things on both ends of the spectrum. It's beneficial to you as the keeper, being that they are live bearing. It's due to inconsistent weather. But if you can have both ends of the spectrum, I think it plays a big role of like throughout the whole cycle, not just getting babies. I think even your ovulation process, timing and everything like that. So, this year I did actually learn this from Menno, because Menno in the Netherlands, I wanted to keep them cooler, but I just adjusted my cages. So like when I bred the occipitalis, I just moved them to the bottom cage. And being at the bottom, your temperature gradient is much less. And what I did was I saw one of the females ovulating. You see it; they swell up, and I saw the animal swelling up, and I'm like, that animal is definitely showing signs. So what I did was I moved her to the bottom cage, and I even like made like a little like bracket to put like a dome on instead of like the regular like halogens I use. And I realized that if you can have both ends of the spectrum, I think it's way better, for you, instead of like cage two like on the cool side, and then keeping like a maybe like say it would say like an halogen bulb or something as an example. You might get that, that hot spot in like 95, 90. But what it does is it heats up the cage on the cool side, and I think it does a disservice. And what happens is on the hot side, it's not hot enough, and I feel that they tend to kind of, bask longer than they should because they're trying to get ample temperature. And I think it does mess with the gestation process. But then, your cool side, if they want to retreat, it's still pretty warm because, those ambients got a little bit, inside the cage on the cool side, got a little too warm. So what I did is I put it on the bottom. When I put the dome light on like a bracket, it like stayed kind of concentrated in that area. And, what I was getting, it was like, oh, like touching 100. But the cool side was like, let's just say like springtime, the cool side was like maybe like 70, 4 throughout the day, you know? And like I can't mimic that on a top cage, it's just really hard to do that. So, I moved her to the bottom of that cage and, hotspot was getting over 100, but the cool side was beautiful. I mean, even I think even like early spring after her ovulation period, I think it was even in like on the cool side in the high 60s. And I feel like if you're able to get them as hot as they can and charge, because you think about it in the wild, like, anybody, I think even, like somewhere like you and me in like the Northeast and the North Midwest, You go on a spring day, not even summer, a spring day, a nice, decently warm day, and you temp gun, it's gonna be really high up there. And I think a lot of these guys do that. They tend to they're not sitting out basking all day long, and to be honest with you, I think that does a disservice. If you're watching an animal bask all day long, I don't think it's in my opinion, from what I'm seeing, it's not always the best thing. You want them to be able to get as hot as they can, charge up their system, and then be able to get that ample temperature and then retreat. And that's, I really believe, listen, I haven't been in the wild. I guess you could say it's an opinion, but it's kind of more or less makes sense that, they're getting where they need to go, ample temp, and then pulling back. And then, what I have seen very much so a lot, it's very consistent, like data that, they will hold those temperatures for long periods of time. I've temp gun females where they're hours away from the heat and they're still at like 88. And that's the consistency I see with a lot of gravid females, is that like you temp gun them away when they pull back from the heat, they're at that 88 range. And again, they are their own incubator. Like they're gonna, if you give them everything that they can have, where it's a cool side and a beyond hot side, not beyond what you're burning them, but like 105, could even go 110. I think you could go more than that, but is it necessary? I don't think so. But you want them to be able to charge, and then be able to say, hey, I'm going to thermoregulate. Now, then having it just at 90 or 88, and you've seen them sitting out there just too long, I think it doesn't equate right with gestation, in my opinion. So that's what I did this year with the occipitalis, and it worked. I got six perfectly beautiful, six babies that are perfect, and most of the time I was keeping them too warm and not being able to kind of cool them properly, and I was getting stillborns. Not stillborns, actually. I'm sorry. I'll be transparent. Like babies that would come out alive, but I believe that she dropped them too early, and I think it could be baby's process was sped. She just dropped them, or in my opinion, she started to kind of stress her system and started to kind of just drop them out. That would be like my ultimate guess. But this time, and then also they were I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't know exact date, but roughly, I'm pretty confident, I'm pretty roughly on that I was always getting those weak babies at like June, like 20, in the 20 range, June 25th, 28th. But a lot of those babies are all babies that were too weak, right? Then this year she was holding on to them, and I was actually kind of stressing out. Like some people out there probably know, she was holding on to them, but what do you know? She had a perfect litter. I want to say it was like late, yeah, I think it was July like 26th. So that's like almost a whole month,
Yeah, it's a bit longer.
which tells you a big story. Like it tells you that all parameters are right, and the observation and thought that have, I think plays a big role. And actually even like had a conversation with Don Patterson. I think this is what's important too, is being able to, share information, and, like even just me talking right now, you don't know who else is out there that might, shoot me an inbox and say, hey, I've seen, data on that too. And, this is where things are inconsistent, and this is where things are consistent. So now I can't say that this is 100% consistent, but, this is I think it's my third now, like perfect litter. And like every baby was like perfect. So, and the thing about Ospitalis, like compared to some of the other, species, is like they come out like not that they're a weaker baby. They're not as like the way they're formed. Like whoever's produced occipitalis out there, like when you grab like an occipitalis baby, they're like gooey, like really gooey, like just not like where if you had something go wrong, like they would be probably, in my opinion, like last on the totem pole of like being able to make it. I think that's where I had problems, because there's like some other species that like babies are a little weak, but it's very much easier to get them back to health, or like nurse them. Whereas these guys, like they're definitely a little more like fragile. So like your odds of them like coming out have to be near perfect, where there can't be any issues at all. So and that there's something there that tells me something. And the thing is, I wish I did it sooner because I kind of did feel that way, and I think I got a little complacent. I think complacency is not a good thing. I think being able to be incomplacent and kind of always re-brainstorm of like what's good, what can happen next, what can you do next, what did you see here that maybe you could play a role into the next year of doing things. And so far that hit, and yeah, I kept things much cooler, I think. And the thing is too is like, I think how important it could be to have larger caging for some of these species. I think it plays a big role. Because you're able to do certain things like that, you're able to get them as high as you can, but also as cool as you can. When you have like a 4 foot cage or, something that's a little smaller, I think it makes it a little harder to be able to micromanage, be able to kind of, understand your parameters. So that's something that, it can be beneficial. I've noticed is that's why I love the pit setups I have, because they're able to do a lot of things, and I think even playing a role and exercise as well. I think that I've heard this from others, and I see what I see now, but like I don't want to say like I totally came up with this and I've figured it out, but I do believe that sometimes smaller caging or like smaller situations, especially for Ragusa, for Shinglebacks, I think it's not good, because when they're in the wild, they're probably moving very much well and limited to food. They're limited to the amount of food they can eat. That's not always readily available. But in captivity, when you have like a small cage and you're feeding them all the time, and there's not much for them to really do enrichment wise, think it could be a really big problem, especially for Ragusa, the Shinglebacks.
Yeah.
I think that what happens is from what I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking is it's a problem between the dam and the babies. So like when they're not really moving around and you're feeding them pretty much, you know some people tend to overfeed, and I think that messes with you know, mom having too much inside of her, and then you can play a role with babies. Like their metabolism. When they're not, when nothing's, nobody's metabolism is moving too much because they're not getting exercise and they're intaking food and intaking food and taking food. Well, what happens is the baby's inside, their metabolism isn't really moving. They're not really burning anything off either. So the babies get ginormous, and with Ragusa, all you need is just that little bit too much, and you're having a big problem. And any type of like fatty deposits, can block the cloaca. Could be a problem. I think and they're starting to show some data on that, and I think that trying to figure that out is going to be something big for myself. And I would like to reach out to some like Australian guys that like maybe keep them outside, or like, I would love to understand the data on that. Like, is there a lot of like, problems with moms birthing out babies, and, are they seeing that they're dying with babies inside or having to do like, consistent, C-section. I think that that's something that I would like to learn more on, because I'm sorry, like there's nothing in the reptile kingdom that you're seeing the size of those babies that come out. I posted a video up, and everybody could see that it's just unreal, like almost unrealistic, that the size of these babies. And I just feel like all you need is like the most you know like small thing to happen for you to have a problem. And I think that if you're not on it, I think that, yeah, that's two of the babies. Yeah, actually, one on the top was a weak one, born
Yeah,
40
it does look a little
grams.
smaller.
But actually, that was like, I took that video like, I think like maybe a couple weeks after they were born, because I want to make sure that baby got on point. But yeah, that baby was born 40 grams, and the other one, from what I remember, pretty sure it was like 130 something grams. And actually,
That's huge.
that smaller baby was born first, and then the following day, that second one was born. I knew she had something else. I'm like, I thought she had maybe three because the mother was still giant. So yeah, so I what I did was I just nursed that baby back. The thing about that baby too, it did eat its placenta and it kind of had like good energy. And I'm like, all right, I think this will be fine. Just kind of dial in, focus on it, and it's coasted now. It's looking great. I haven't waited. Like it was from 40 and it went to like 70. I wouldn't doubt that baby's like touching 100 now, so it's fine. It's spunky, eats fine. And but like I said, I just think that any little ob that's stacked against you, you can have a big problem on your hands. So
So I wanted to jump back on some you said with Oxpitalis. You mentioned that like go for the high 60s and then the 110 basking. Do you you could get like 120 to 60? It would extend the gestation longer, making the babies a little more spunky.
so say that again. Extend. What are you saying? Extend. I'm sorry. I think it like kind of cut out, so I didn't really get the. If you could start like something about extending.
Basically, if you adjusted how the caging is to make the gestation longer, do you think the babies would be better? Because like one of
What, in
the
those higher
litters I had,
temperatures?
yeah,
I don't personally. I don't think 160 is necessary, and I think when you start to go in that range is when you spike those cooler sides. I think you could go in that 110 range. I 120. I think if you could get a bigger cage, so like I think a 4 footer, it's really hard to do that. I think even a 5 footer could be pushing it, but like a 6 foot cage or a 6 foot open pit, I think can play a big role. That you're able to. I think during spring months, I get them the basking a little. It's like a little over 100, but like when summer rolls around, it's like 110 and change for sure. But I 160, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think 140 is necessary. Can you do it? I think you
no,
can.
like I think I must have cut in and out, not 160, like
Yeah, that's what I could have
120, and
sworn it was.
then like the coal, then like in the
Maybe the
60s.
six. All right, that's what it was. I probably couldn't
Yeah,
because yeah, exactly. I think that it could be beneficial for sure. I do, as long as your heat source is not in an area where it can like burn them or anything. But at that 110 range, 115, you could even go 120. I just think it's on the safe side to go in that 110 range, even 105. But I just think when you're in like low 90s and like 88, I really do just have that mindset of like it's just it's just hindering it's like on the edge where it tends to make them really search for more heat and then they wind up staying out there too long. That's just my opinion though. And I do want to see more on that, but for instance, like the pits have been a hit, man. Like I've noticed that it's playing a big role in like a lot of good things happening. And I like that open concept. I like, you know, you're able to control more and you're able to have two ends of the spectrum. So I think it plays, it's I've seen benefits in it. But listen, not everybody can do it. It's that's why I say maybe a 5 foot cage. If anybody can get like a 5 foot cage, I think you can just kind of hit it right where you want it and have like, a nice, low, dome that's kind of somewhat low to the ground and like able to just get a nice basking spot and then be able to retreat and thermoregulate because, they're giving they're live bearing for a reason, because weather is too inconsistent. And, I think that plays a role in like trying to be able to get both ends of the spectrum, slow the process down. And I think, to me, the biggest thing is even your timing. I think we like tend to, use timing as like a specific, where I think we should use it on the macro scale, not a micro scale, like not like one specific thing. I think timing plays a role in everything. And like meaning like, that's where that both ends of the spectrum play a big role for like the starting process. So like on the macro scale of timing, like it's not just, oh, was the female in her optimum window? Was the male in his optimum? Was the temperature in its optimum? And all those, the word timing has so many like little bubbles around it because I believe there's this option, there's that option, there's that reason, and all that needs to correlate. I think that's what plays like such a big role in what breeding Taliqua is. That's in my opinion. This is what I'm seeing. So like and this is another thing I've done. I've been able to palpate females. Like I've been doing that with geckos, and I've learned it into skinks. And I think it's a beneficial thing too because when females are ovulating, you can have some type of correlation where you're timing it right. And it's funny. Like I always say, like I was telling Jeremy Johnson, and I say that it's actually, in my opinion, easier to breed the animals I'm breeding than it is animals that are closer to the equator. Why? Because when you have temperatures at a flat line, you're not knowing the timing of the females. So like, if they're not ovulating, yeah, some males a lot of males don't, they just breed to breed. You're just like watching them. Yeah, certain males might know who's not and who's is, but like sometimes they say, "Let's get this done, ask questions later." But like if your animals having animals close to the equator, like your timing can be so gapped. Because one female could be ovulating here and then the other one. Whereas me, as long as you're doing everything that they need and being able to cool properly, well, as you're starting to bring up temps slowly, they're all the window is much more at a standard than like the ones that are closer to the equator, in my opinion. So like I look at it that way as like, timing on a macro scale is like the biggest thing, not timing specific to like, oh, what are the female is in her window, whether, no, it's literally everything. It is in my opinion, that's what I've learned is like, you know, if males are not on the optimum, sperm levels, females, if they're not in their proper, window, and even for themselves in like the parentheses, meaning like, if they could ovulate, but they could just reabsorb too if things aren't right. So, and then there's also temperature, so that's why I always say like when you could cool pretty drastically, even with like intermedia, if you could be able to still cool, right, and have some type of gradual warm up, I think it's beneficial to you much more. And actually, I don't know what it's like down in Florida, but I wouldn't doubt there's more consistency with them doing it outside than it would be indoors. Why? Because a lot of times you're keeping animals together, so males and females understand what's going on, and then you're watching temperature swings. So like you're watching like morning be a different temperature tonight, and there's not much of a flat line. There's inconsistencies. Then you get like a rainy day. Well, it's like a wash, and then that usually their window still kind of goes on. So I think timing outside as a whole is all connected into all those bubbles. Like there's so much, the timing is with everything is so much better. Your temperatures are fluxing, so it slows down females' ovulation process. You got like temperatures, you got females and males are now correlated with each other. They're kind of, in a sense, cohabbed. So they're understanding what's going on. Males understand, things are slowed down for males, things are slowed down for females. I think when you start rushing the process, your timing is just, your odds are stacked. Like I always say, the roulette table, if you're able to raise your temperatures up slowly and not rush it, if you're able to when you slow those things down, you're getting, you're putting more numbers on the roulette table for the males, for the females. And I think if you can find a way to do that, you're going to have timing as a whole connected. I think that's what, I see things, more consistencies than speeding the process up, or even just like, oh, like I just, temperatures are the same. I just start feeding them. Yeah, that listen, you can still get success and it still could be consistent, but why not have a little more, of a, what's the word? Like some type of change, like a slow change. I think you're gonna have the better, consistency. And then, even when you go to like a cage environment, I think that could play a role. Having to be able to, have those baskings and those cool sides, you're gonna slow things down. The females are gonna ovulate properly. They're gonna slowly, ovulate. They're not gonna be sped. And then that's why when you get slug outs, because another thing is too, breeding your males too much. I think it does a disservice. I've noticed it's like when you breed a male to like six females. I think I don't know exactly, what the reasoning is, but I see a little more consistency than just doing like a one-on-one or like a overlapping one. Like you overlap a male between two females, but like that's why a lot of times you get, a lot of slugs is like everything was going right, but what happens is maybe that the female was past that ovulation process and got, those ovums got pushed into the oviduct and it was just too fast. There was no correlation. So basically, your male was just at his optimum, but female's dirty window is pretty much gone. Yeah, you got a lock, but the odds were stacked against you because that wasn't technically right. And I've even learned this year. So like I always heard like Shinglebacks, like you don't pair them, they don't ovulate, they don't have any infertile ovums. And I actually talked about Dave with this recently, and I'm like, I gave a female off as a break because she bred, and I was like, let me give her a break. She doesn't look 100%. I don't want to sure give her a break. Gave her a break. She was alone all year, and what do you know? Just the other day, I saw two giant ovums. And Dave told me that maybe it's a pheromone thing. Maybe something caused her to want to ovulate and turn it into something. So these are all little things that you learn, and that's why I'm always a big believer in like it's dependent because temperature plays a role with males too. I always say that waking up your males first is more beneficial. Why? Everybody that's watching right now, you know that males can create sperm plugs for they can create sperm plugs for a very long time, whereas females' windows are really short. So why not have your males come out a little earlier? Just so you're kind of getting a good overlap. You're not breaking them out together, and I think that could play a role.
So do you do about 2 weeks then, or?
I'd say 2 weeks. I mean, intermedia, I would say maybe a week and change. For indoor keepers. Again, this is captivity. This is not outdoors. Outdoors, I really believe everything is slowed down. Why? Because you're having these big giant temp swings. Where in captivity, a lot of it's like this. It's you can never mimic the outside. I mean, in a sense, you can, which is a lot of things I'm doing here. But some of them, like stuff that close to the equator, it's a little tougher, but it still could be done. I think there still could be a little bit of a drop. And I always say, like, it sounds, I don't know if this makes sense, but like you need inconsistencies, but you need consistencies. If that makes a lot of sense. So meaning like your consistency in seasonal changes, but inconsistency in certain temperatures that could play a role of like slowing down ovulation and understanding. Like there's a rhythm to things. I think that could play a big role.
So how can we kind of help people get a better timing? Like, I know you could do like dimmers and stuff to slowly warm up and try to do some fans and stuff to keep some of the hot air out.
I
Anything else
mean,
besides bigger, or?
I think it's, ambience can play a big role. If you have a standard of a certain ambient between each month and kind of do like a slow climb, I think it plays a role. So when you wake them up, like you're having a significant drop during winter, and you're basically telling them this is our winter period, and you kind of start to really condition that, and then slowly start to bring things up. And even like my blotched females, like I don't turn their lights on and raise ambience like crazy. No, I actually put like a cloth over the top of them because where they are, they're located close to the ground, and putting that cloth over them still gives them like they're still pretty cool down while I wake some of the other species that are around them. And on the other room is where the males have probably been up for like 2 weeks. So I won't go turning their lights on and trying to get things hot and warm quick. No, I literally take the cloth off. I literally don't even turn lights on. I start letting those ambients kind of start to get in there. It's gonna raise a couple degrees and it's gonna start to be consistent. And basically it's like steak in the freezer. You're starting to thaw them out. And then all of a sudden you'll start to see them start to thaw out and they start to pop out. And I'm reliant on them. I don't want them totally be reliant on me. So I watch what they do, and then I'll start to raise temperatures by maybe turning the basking on, Then I start to let them kind of get going. They'll get their first drink and they'll take a big one. They'll take a nice long drink. But like obviously intermediate and some of the other species, you can still do that. I think that you can still just, I would like keep it cool. Don't start turning the heat on yet. Maybe raise your ambience like a couple degrees, right? Just to kind of get going. Like I said, maybe with intermediate, you wake up your males a week earlier, start to get them kind of going. And then what happens is you start to slowly climb onto just your ambience. And then you'll watch the females pop out. You'll watch them. You'll literally watch them pop out. And then they'll go out, break, and get some water. And what it is it's the process of that, because now it starts the follicular growth. You start speeding that process. I mean, it could be gone and dusted in a week, maybe even sooner. So you're starting to raise ambience now. Watch them take their drink, get their system going. Maybe turn on some heat, right? Start to get those basking going. They're going to pop out. And I do believe that that's another switch to kind of get them going. And then there's also, feeding them, getting their GI going. Once you start to feed them, that really starts to amp things up. The hormones start to change, certain things start to change. If you understand like the puzzle piece before the, little puzzles getting put in and creating the whole puzzle as a whole, I think that if you understand that, I think it can be beneficial to these guys because it's timing as a whole. It's not timing specific to certain things like, oh, the female, well, it's, it was the females, maybe we could say it's like, oh, it's the female's fault. She, her window. It's not just that. I do believe there's so much more. And if you could put it all together into a puzzle, I think it could be beneficial to you,
Is there anything you noticed to kind of jump from each step from like you're at the point where, you just uncovered them, give them a little ambient to when you just start heating them to eat, then to feeding them?
I think I like to watch them because again, like it's not necessary. I think even Joe Ball said this one time. Don't quote me on it, but I remember I watching a video. Like, if I'm not mistaken, I watched the video because I was always like, I'm very enamored by the way he does things. He's done things like consistent for, he to me is the skink king. And I remember he even said that he woke his animals up, bred them first, and then fed them. Now, I don't know if listen, maybe it could have been in the video, it could have been just a little like something was a little skewed and maybe he flipped it, but I believe that you could delay feeding them. And I really do believe when you feed them, it is a light switch, So I think that what you want to do is you want to watch them. I mean, it's a little easier for me because, I have much cooler climated species. So like they when it starts to get a little warmer in there, they come out, and that's what I'm looking for. And I think intermediate, maybe your indos, because I don't know exactly. I would still try to get a little cooling for my indos if I was breeding them, because it kind of conditions and it helps you, like. So I think is you're watching what they're doing. They're going to give you cues that they will pop out. They'll pop out. They'll get a drink, right? And I think those are the cues you look for, and then you start to turn on the heat. Whether it's, if you got the tubs, you could get your thermostat going, or if you have a lamp, some basking, start to get that going, and you could delay things. And what happens is your males are now, as you're delaying things, your males are into the second week now, and you're starting to get them a little pacey. Then you start to feed the females. And what happens is you're now you're almost in a sense controlling the situation. You are Mother Nature. So when you start to control that situation, your timing could be much more aligned. I wish everyone could do it, but even palpating definitely plays a big role. You feel I like blotch females. I can feel when they're ovulating. It's like starts off like a little tic tac, and it starts to become like a marble. Then it becomes a little bit bigger, and then actually it disappears. And when it disappears, I've even learned this with Rhacodactylus, with lychees. It disappears because, and I've learned this from Dr. Scott Stahl, because I always say, I'm like, it disappears, it's gone. Like I'm like, oh shit, like it's, sorry for my French, but
You're good.
it disappears, and I'm like, what the hell happens? And when I talked to Dr. Scott Stahl, he's like, it's because it's getting, what happens is the ovary is now released it, and now it's pushed into the oviduct, and almost like it disappears. And then they start to ovulate, and you see them turn into like a giant balloon. And I feel like if you could be in control of that situation, I think, in my opinion, it could be much more beneficial. And that's what I've learned here, how to breed some of these species and be pretty consistent, is like trying to be Mother Nature, but also not being totally in control. You still want to give them everything they want and need, but remember, Mother Nature has seasonal changes, and you could control those seasonal changes by not rushing it. And I think that's what plays a big role. Like what happens when you pull out a steak out of a freezer? Well, it's not going to defrost in 10 seconds. It takes a really long time. It could be an hour to fully thaw out. It's the same process with these guys when you put them into winter. You're taking the steak out of the freezer and you're slowly letting it thaw out. And you can watch it. Like anybody here can watch, your animal being thawed out from winter. They start to kind of do things. They start to, maybe come out, pop their head out the hide a little bit, right? And then as you start to slowly raise your ambience just a little bit, you start to watch them go out to drink some water. Slow it down. Watch them. Just take it easy. Let them kind of start to pop out. Don't go, oh no, I need to turn everything. Let's get it up to like 90, 100. Boom. Feed them, feed them, feed them. You do all that, man. I'm telling you, I think it really does a disservice to them. So if you can find a way to really thaw out that steak and take it easy, I think, you can watch it. So those little steps, it's like a guitar, you got to fine tune it. And you start to really wind them because again, females have to ovulate. And you can be a manipulator to it. Absolutely. What do you think? People that do it outside have such good success because it's not freaking, 120-degree hotspot everywhere they step. Like it could rain for 3 days and then it totally collapses that window. It totally slows down the window. It's almost like it shuts it off. And then once that sun breaks out again, boom, and I think it slows down the ovulation process towards that female. And then also, I wouldn't doubt, because I hear a lot of Australian guys say, and it really does make sense, is if you're speeding the process with a male too, sperm count I think could play a role. They're not as fertile, I believe. And I've watched it. You get some. I think that you maybe like you'll watch a litter that has two babies, and then like the rest are slugs. I think there needs to be ample on both ends, and if you can get that right, but you can get it right if you understand how to be Mother Nature and not rush the situation, because when you take a male and a female out, like there is a process, and if you speed the process, that's a problem. But if you can slow it down, I think that you're gonna, I say the roulette table, you're gonna put more numbers on the table, and your odds are gonna increase than to try to rush things too fast. Even I do believe waking up at the same time in captivity it does. I think there's more safety net to waking a male up a little earlier and than to wake them up at the same time. But I do believe, which I've learned with Shinglebacks, that open pit concept, you can wake them up together because the open pit is reliant on ambience and it's not enclosed and there's no spikes. It kind of stays where you want it. And the dictation is, your ambience controlled, through maybe a heater. And that's kind of how I do it. There's a standard each month. Like I kind of set a temperature that I want. As they wake up in spring, I set a temperature. It can't go below it, and I kind of set it there. And then maybe the next couple of weeks, I'll raise it a little bit, and then it can go higher, but it can't go lower. Now the reverse is in summer where I set it at a temp, right? Like right now, night temps are, I keep it at that 75, 76, 74 through 76. So when it gets too over 76 at night, it starts to kind of cool down, right? And then, but it could go below that if it wants. Sometimes we'll get a cool night and it could go a little bit below. But that's like what's the like when you use the choke? Like you can only go a certain, like I guess in a quad or like you can only so like now like when fall starts to come, as summer's starting to decrease, so we're getting into September. Now I'll set it to like 74, 72 at night, right? Then we're getting into the middle of September into, beginning of October. we'll start to get into at nighttime into the 60s, maybe 68. It could go a little bit lower at 65. And then I have it set at 68, but it could go, the air conditioner will be set at 68. It could go lower, and I'll watch it. What I'm doing is I'm letting Mother Nature on the outside dictate what's going on the inside. But I'm putting a choke. Like I'm putting it where it only could go, obviously depending on each year, it can only go high or low. And then we're just starting to, slowly decline. We are Mother Nature, and if you could understand that in captivity, you're almost mimicking the outside. I think it can really be vital to production. That's how I look at it.
Do you think at a certain point stretching it too much would be negative? And I know some of that might depend on kind of where you live. Some places don't have as long of a winter, so they might need to adapt a little.
I think that some type of conditioning can really be beneficial. Like, so for instance, like, depending on where you are, it's not going to be as perfect as, what it is with me and you. But if you could somewhat condition them and do a slow and steady process, I think that I believe, I guess we could still say it's an opinion, but there is consistency here, that understanding that, conditioning them plays a big role and not speeding it too fast. But I can always say sometimes it's hard when somebody's subjected to like one room and they have a bunch of different species everywhere. It really makes it hard. Here it's like I am specific to them, period. Like there's nothing else in there that, is this side of the world or that side. It's literally, this is specified to them. To be honest with you, I think that, and I'm not sitting here judging. I don't want to judge, but I think us as keepers, if we specified, I think we could produce things that, you wouldn't think you could, because you're specifying in that what's going on with that specific species. But what happens is, first off, a lot of people like different reptiles and understood. So what happens is you start to play that game of like, maybe if there's a way we can have a room specific to species that are climated to those temperatures we're using, that could be much more beneficial. But I feel if you specialize in something, and I'm sure there's data out there that people that specialize in specifics and arrange their parameters and room and facility into specific to that species, I'll bet every bottom dollar that they're succeeding very well. That there's consistency there,
Oh, it definitely makes
Yeah.
sense. You're tailoring the odds to benefit you. You're at a certain point, you get too much going on, you start, having worse success from that alone too.
Yep.
You stretch yourself too thin. So, and this would be kind of more the like open pit ones, but do any of them really like require more like privacy or physical barriers, like during breeding, to where they all seem pretty good once they're established?
Yeah, once they're established, they're good. I do, believe that they should have like nice amounts of court flats and areas where they can all kind of hide. Yeah, definitely. Now, are you saying this in general or like specific to a certain Taliqua or?
In general, like I don't know if say, and I know you don't really have any blotch together, but like
Yeah,
I
I
know,
have females together.
okay, I know like some females can maybe get a little more hormonal with other females when they're about to lay. So I don't know if you had any issues with that or.
So this is the only issue that I have, and I just play the game. So the issue that I've had is plate food. They do great. They'll eat together. You start whipping out some like meat, like mice, quail, bugs, they will really go after each other. Yes. So what I do is I just kind of split them into corners and feed. So like I play the game of like you go over here, you go over here, you go over there, and then I feed one, feed the other, and just moderate. Because what happens is they like sometimes when one finishes faster and one's like a mouse, say like a mouse tail sticking out or like a piece of sticking out, they'll go over and grab and like they'll shake, they want it, and it gets really bad. So I think it's a good idea to just kind of watch when you do that, because I need to get like some of the, especially the gravid girls, some of that meaty type food to kind of help. But yeah, that's the only like downside I noticed with Ragusa. I don't see that. They'll get curious and like they won't get aggressive. But I'm more plate food for them anyway. But yeah, I don't see much of a problem. Just the only thing with Talico that can stink, you guys, I'm sure you know, Alex, and people are watching, like, they do that, like, roll, and it's like, say you have, like, aspen shavings, or, like, they like, do the, like, they'll grab it, and they just, like, roll it into aspen, and it just gets full of aspen shavings.
Yeah.
It's like when you put chicken into, like, making a cutlet, like the breadcrumb, it's like putting breadcrumb, all the shavings on the thing. So, yeah, stuff like that. Like, yeah, but that's another thing with Ragusa is like everyone's like, oh, like they need to eat vegetables, but like I think I feel very confident that they're not the way they act. They're not just eating vegetables out there. They all do the same thing when you give them like an insect or a quail, like a baby quail chick. They all do that head smashing, rocking, and if they're all doing it, it's for a reason. They're it's in their instincts. And I think when the opportunity there is in the wild, they'll take that opportunity to grab something, and they all do the same thing, the head smashing. You know,
Yeah,
Sometimes
it
some of
kind of.
them are so bad, man. It's like, dude, stop doing that. You're like gonna have a mouthful of aspen shavings or pine shavings. So
Yeah, and then they'll drop the insect and then try to eat the wood chip instead.
yeah,
Or
yeah, it's just yeah. It's they're funny. They're characters though, but I do want to point out though, like overfeeding too is just not good. I don't think it's good. I really don't. I think especially with birthing, especially shinglebacks. I believe that I've like during wake up, I do like believe in a little consistency, but it needs to taper off. You don't want to overfeed your Ragusa, man. I think that because of how big their babies are, I believe it could be a problem, you know? So,
now, do you think part of it's that, or because they're, and this will probably depend on the setup, but the ones that are stuck basking more, they're not moving as much because they're basking more. So, basically the food's not moving through as quick, and they're, building up stool, fat, whatever.
um, I just think that I think it's a combination. That's another thing I'm starting to learn too. I think I think it's a combination. I think another thing I'm learning, I've been talking about this, and you know what? We'll talk about it now because it's kind of fresh. I didn't tell a lot of people, but it's kind of sad, but like at the same time, like a good thing that she made it. So I know if people are watching and have seen my videos, if anybody knows the famous cutie pie, which is the sparrow.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, um, and this is great that we're going to be talking about this because I think the information needs to get out there, and I would even love to learn more from people, especially guys in Australia, man. I mean, they have the data, they've seen it. But so what happened was I caught her. I think that's another thing is like I really believe how important, man, it is to observe your animals and see what's going on. That's a big thing towards me, and why I've learned a lot from them is I'm always watching and always trying to understand. That's why you'll see me get live birthing videos because I know who's going, I know who's close and who's going to drop any day. And Cutie Pie dropped the baby. Um, she dropped the baby and she was splaying. So like splaying is like when they they're putting their two back legs, they're lifting their tail, and they're trying to push out. Um, I saw her like continuously doing that, and hours gone by, more hours gone by. I'm like, oh no. So she did it. She had one baby, perfectly healthy, and I'm saying to myself, and then I see that she's splaying and water's kind of leaking out, and then I see that it looks like she has something else in there. Then I'm like, the hours keep passing, and I'm like, oh no, man. So I went and palpate. So that's another good thing to be able to palpate. I palpated her and I felt the baby. I felt another baby in there, just like in an awkward position. And I messaged Dr. Scott Stahl, which like, oh man, having him there definitely helped and kind of get an idea. And then I had my doctor, Dr. Savo, which is a doctor I have here. And this was like, there's such amazing vets out there, and it was like, dude, just to have like a team effort come together. So I called Dr. Savo, and I'm like, I think I got an emergency. Like, I think like she's gonna, because she looked pooped. Like, there was a time where she stopped playing and she looked burnt out, like just totally burned out. And I said, I'm gonna make the move and get her to the vet. So I called, and she was like, the doctor was like, um, you know, I said maybe I could bring her tomorrow because it was late. It was pretty late, man, like super late. So I was like, maybe I can, come tomorrow. She's like, I'm not in tomorrow. And I was like, well, I know there's a baby, and like I know there's something, like something's up. She's like, you confident there's a baby in there? And I'm like, I'm confident. So I rushed her over, and we took CT scans, and we saw that there was another baby in there. I knew that the baby was dead. I'm very confident, like it's always possible, but like when you see water like spitting out of them, like the cloaca, I believe that there's a membrane, and you guys all see it. I think even like Manny put a video up one time of like, it was like a dead baby, like his mom died, and like you see the membrane, and then you see like the baby inside. So I think the baby, broke that membrane, and I knew right away that when you break that membrane, they're trying to get air now at that point, and inside it's not gonna work out. So we went there, and Dr. Savo said that the baby breached, and basically Dr. Scott Stahl like said it. Basically, it was the baby was stuck in the pelvic inlet, right? And um, basically, it's like our terms, it's like the baby took a U-turn. Like it was coming out the cloaca and then just decided to turn back up, almost. And then once the baby's dead, well, I think there's like that's the salsa dancing, like it takes two to tango. And I think there is like a give and take. Um, so there's so much to learn, and I'm the type of person that doesn't like complacency, so like I'm trying my best to like understand what the hell's going on here, and maybe there needs to be certain protocol. So Cutie Pie had to have emergency surgery. She's stable. She's stable. Basically her life was saved. Both doctors said that basically her life was saved because in the pelvic inlet, or like where it was, it's a ticking time bomb at that point. So there's so many different factors that I'm learning. And again, if there's any Australian guys, because I think they have the most data on like just where the consistencies are, like, oh hey, I've never heard of this. And then now I'm saying to myself, well, something's happening again in captivity. And again, there's a bevy of reasons. And being that Ragusa, the Shinglebacks, have such large bababies. These babies, I've had the largest baby was 143 grams coming out. That's nuts. Like that's like in the lychee world, that's like a subadult lychee. So, I think it just takes the littlest bit for your odds to be stacked against you now at that point. I really do believe that. I believe that any type of parameter, any type of husbandry, any type of this or that, you know, she was a smaller bodied animal too. Cutie Pie is like kind of a small sparrow, so that could play a role. What I'm really starting to kind of push towards, that I really believe, and I'm going to try to work it, is that in the wild, I believe that they hunker down into like a burrow or something. And I don't know if they're out there long, or maybe they poke their head out to get some sun late term when they're about to give birth. They get that heat, they pop back in. But like where they are under a burrow or where they're going to have babies, the humidity I think is so high. And I think that, in my opinion, that maybe acts as if it's its own lubrication, right? That if you understand that, like I believe that everyone's like, oh, humidity, hydration, like they just need hydration, just drink. I think there is a lot more to it. I think that, in their tissue, being that a lot of us, living organisms are mainly made of water. I believe if sometimes they're too dry and they're dehydrated, could play a role. So like when they're, about to give birth, they're hunkered down in like a chamber that's like 80% humidity, you know, I believe that, in the air, it's going through the tissue and it goes from the tissue to the internals. And I think maybe that could play a role as like its own natural lubricator. That's one category, and I do believe in humidity for these guys. I think you'd be surprised that maybe a lot of people think that, humidity's, they can't have humidity. I think that's false. I've learned that and I've seen it, and I like my babies that I produced last year were in an area where, most of the time it's 70% humidity, and I never had an issue. Now, I'm not saying that's the basis of what it needs. I don't think that. I do believe that keeping it in that 50-60 range, but I'm starting to understand that maybe some type of um, you know, humid hide could be very beneficial to them. And I watch it. I watch these females when they give birth. They don't sit still when they're leading to giving birth. And they tend to start pacing or almost like they feel uncomfortable. It could just be, very well be, just because they're about to give birth. But like, is there other factors? Do they feel they need something else? That's one factor. Then there's the factor of overfeeding. If you overfeed, I think that could play a big role. Any type of fat storage or extra fat storage, I believe that it could be a possibility of having problems with babies being pushed out. Not only that, you know, the female itself is a carrier. When it's totally fat storage and tails always perfectly fine, their fatty deposits are always perfectly fine or even abnormal. Well, that means that that's happening to the baby now. Is that they're in ample perfection of giant, doing great, always fully formed, no imperfections at all. I think that could play a role too. When everything's too perfect, I don't think it's good either. In the wild, these guys are made to live off a lot of their fat storage, and I wouldn't doubt a major part of gestation. They're not at all, finding ample food all the time. It's not always right there, and that's all you need for a baby to be just a little too big inside, mom, and it's a problem to get it through that little tiny hole, or any type of blockage. Any type of blockage near that cloaca, it could just be a big problem. Exercise, I've actually talked about this with Menno. I think that being able to kind of have a large cage and for them to move around can be beneficial. I noticed too, smaller, like I said, with cutie pies, smaller bodied Ragusa, I think odds are stacked against them right there. All you need is a baby over 100 plus grams. It can be a problem getting out. So, this is fresh to me, and and actually maybe it's good because it's kind of like I'm in a sense venting out here, and it's a vent that can be beneficial to people. So
So, do you think you'll breed her again, or is it better to not breed the ones that might be a little smaller, or based on the amount and more genetic diversity for now?
so
It is what it is.
from what I'm hearing is that she could be bred again.
Oh.
But this is the tough, like it's tough. It's like I don't know if I want to breed her, but I do believe that, because the surgery is like a walk in a park in a sense that, you're just kind of getting into the oviduct, picking the baby out, doing like, whereas it's nothing that's attached to the ovary. I feel like that's where you're because the ovary is the maker of it, whereas like the oviduct's the holder of it. So I believe as long as because the baby's in the oviduct, I believe that there's no damage to the ovary. What I think the smart thing to do by me, and again, if there's anybody out there, I would love to hear information. It would be so beneficial. But what I will be planning to do is, there's I guess protocols to smaller animals or animals that had those type of surgeries, is giving her a year off. Is That's definitely what I'm going to do, is just let her kind of recuperate. I think that's a smart move. And then maybe some of the smaller bodied shinglebacks, maybe it's a good idea for like females to not be bred until like year 4 into 5. Maybe that could be a good thing than trying to breed them too early. That's what I can give. But in a sense, like, there needs to be data out there. And I have heard people have had females have surgery and consistently breed after that just fine.
Well, and from a lot of the stuff you've been saying does make sense. And I know, humans are different, but like what you're saying, and I know northerns do it too, like when they're getting ready to give birth, they start pacing. I always wondered it was a combination, maybe like the hormones ramping, but then
Or babies moving too. Like they could be like, all right, we're ready. And we're all like kind of wiggling up in here.
But I think also humans too, like some of them, they say the activity helps get the baby out, if I remember right. God,
Yeah.
it's been a little bit.
Well, I mean, that could be what's making the female react. But
Oh yeah.
But what I do notice too, and I've learned this, and I would tell anybody this, and again, I'm seeing it now, and I'm seeing it every year, is having areas where they can almost button up and tighten up and get somewhere where I've seen it with my blotched, and I think that not having that probably could have killed her. So a blotched female had a baby somewhat breached too. This thing was ginormous, a ginormous blotched baby that was coming out, and she was all pacing, freaking out all day, but like running under cork, almost like as if you took the toothpaste and you're kind of, you know, squeezing what you had in there, and that's what she was doing under flats, was literally trying to tighten up and then try to wiggle and move, and it literally looked as if she was trying to position the baby a certain way. And I've seen it with the shinglebacks, I've seen it with other species. So I think anybody out there that has something, they should have something they can get themselves tight under, so they can position maybe a baby to come out if it's maybe in not the best location.
Now, one thing you mentioned on like hydration and humidity, other than like, humid hide, you think we should do anything else for pregnant females? It's
Yeah,
not
so
like,
I've learned this from Dave, and I've actually like back then when I first started, have somewhat saved an animal because she was having a baby under the basking, and it was basically the baby was stuck and drying out. So I think a solid misting towards birthing season, like mist a good amount, to kind of really bring the humidity out there. I think it's like, for instance, here's a good example that everyone could we all can understand. Every time anybody that has ever put an animal into a bin and has soaked them, a very high percentage of those animals are going to poop or pee. And I think it plays a role in, like, having that relaxed feeling, kind of able to just kind of let loose. I think that when you do a nice mist, it could really be helpful. Even when I see females like birthing, I'll actually just keep misting like heavy in there. And also it helps kind of dampen down, the medium, like whatever you have medium wise. And then like even under the basking area, I try to really like mist very well. Just, in case they're, having a birthing underneath that like basking light. So I think misting helps. It could be a plus.
um, no, you have some of your males and females separate, like different rooms. Do you think it'd be beneficial? And, I know, not everyone has the same amount of room, but is it worth splitting them up, like across the room, separate rooms? Or, pheromones don't matter that much. It might be better that they are in the same room near the end.
So wait, you're saying like when they're about to
It's,
give birth?
I guess that'd be more during breeding season. Sorry.
I mean, that one's tough because like I feel like on any scale, it's theoretically like very hard to do. Um, but like I think for timing purposes, it could be, helpful. Like if you have two rooms, you can wake up your males while the females are still kind of in cooling. And there's a little bit more control there than trying to juggle in the same room. I guess that could be that's what I see. But as far as like keeping it all together, I think it's or trying to keep them all separated. I think it's like near kind of, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's not easy. I mean, I always say if you had like a warehouse, like just an open warehouse, I would much rather choose little small rooms because you're able to be able to control them better than just having one giant, warehouse.
So would you go pretty detailed, even to the extent you'd have a room for each species and male and female
And
for each?
I mean, and being able to control each room, I think so. Yeah, why not? You know. I think that, and it's a benefit. Like if anybody out there, like reptile person that like wants a breeding program, I think it would be better to if you have a giant, warehouse garage, having like small little rooms to be able to micromanage, then macromanage and play this juggling act. I think it's able to be able to control each room, and then when you do is you can work with different species now. You could control this room specific to this certain species. Oh, I got something that's closer to the equator. Well, let's make this room specific to, the equator, or, this is, southern, below the equator or, northern, towards like our area. Yeah, absolutely. I would rather do that because then you can work with a bunch of reptiles and it's specific to their wants and needs.
Now, with let's go the opposite. How can we do it to help micromanage in one room?
Uh,
Automation,
I
misters for
mean,
your.
so in one room, like having things on one side of the room and the other side, having, like if I were to have, like for instance, if I had one room, um, I would try to have my females towards the floor. The coolest point is towards the ground, and then maybe have your male somewhere, if you have cages stacked on the top, so that you're able to start to control up top but the bottom is still where you need it to be temperature wise, and then you start to slowly raise it, and your males are going to get the head start they need. Or for instance, if you have racks, I mean, if you could split them two sides of the room, that could be helpful too.
Now, it's interesting you say that. Like, we kind of thought the opposite, where we had the males lower to try to keep them cooler during breeding, but you had a little different issue with yours trying to.
Well, you can also find ways to micromanage inside the cage, like so for instance, that's a great question. That this is coming off the fly in my head right now. So like, finding ways to, you know, get the males up and then finding a way to maybe do like a flip too. Like that could be a good option. So meaning like, you know, take the male as he's starting to pace around, drop him back to the bottom, now start to bring the female at the top. And don't turn the lights on yet. Let those ambients come and let her come out on her own. Then do the switch. As that's happening, the male's still kind of staying where he needs to be, and we're not overheating him. And then you're slowly bringing up the female. Again, females start to ovulate. All you have to do is time that right. So that could be something you do too, like a flip flop. Start male, keep it where it's somewhat still cool in the ambience, and on the outside on the macro, and on the micro, you're just kind of keeping it, low and slow. Get them where they need to be, then start to flip it and put the males back down to the bottom with lights on as they're going, and now females slowly start to acclimate them into those temperatures. Maybe leave the lights off, let them pop out on their own, slowly do the process, delay feeding because GI is feeding their stomach is a light like a switch on its own, and then start to turn the lights on, just like a juggling act.
I wonder if that would get too complicated. It's I know you could.
Everything's complicated. It's just, are you willing to do it? That's what it is. Some
Well,
people
yeah.
might think, some people could think like, hey, oh man, that's like a lot. Like, but hey, what if it did work? Now you had something to go off of the following year to have more consistency. Sometimes being incomplacent and try to make a change and see if there's consistency in that change. And then, but again, you know how blue tongues are, man. You think one thing and all of a sudden it's like, wait, what? Like, it's like they just play games with you. But I do believe in understanding how females ovulate. If you start to speed the process up, there is consistently an understanding that you can really make it work with you or against you.
No, between the blotch and the western, uh, I know you don't have a ton of data. What seems to have more like bigger litters, and you'd probably agree the blotch for now is more consistent.
Ooh, wait, so you're saying litter sizes or like more success?
So both litter size, what has bigger litter size, and what do you feel more successful with?
So I do believe they are very similar in litter size. Like, I have a female here that produced a litter at 8. I'm pretty sure that's like an anomaly. Like, that's not because some Australian guys are like, dude, like that's not always. Usually it's like 3 to 5. Except for like the lowlands. From I know lowlands have bigger litters, but like highland forms, usually like it's like 5 babies, touching 6 if you're lucky, and I believe that's pretty similar to occipitalis. I've had more success. I've had success with both consistently, but I've had more success with blotch to like babies being fully formed and okay and beautiful coming out. But that's due to keeping them cooler. Now I just did that this year with occipitalis where I've kept them cooler throughout the process and I'm starting to see more success. So that's what I see this year because I've had success every year. Like last year, um, I did have success. I had 3 litters. No, 2, I'm sorry, 2 litters and then 1 girl slugged out. The 2 litters were weak babies, and I couldn't nurse them back to health, but I kept them too hot. Now, what if I did it the same as I did with blotch? I could sit here and say that I've been successful with both,
Yeah.
and technically I had a litter of 6 baby occipitalis, and I had a litter of 8 with a female, and I had a litter of one. I had a litter of 1 baby and a few slugs.
And that's, at end of the day, you can't really, blame that on yourself. It's a learning thing, and
Yeah, I do. I do. To be honest with you, I kind of do. I'm hard on myself. Like, I'm
we
not
all
like,
can.
oh my god, what the f is wrong with you? Like, you're horrible. I don't do that, but I like, I'm very like internally competitive. Like, I don't like have malice towards anybody else. I don't believe in competition. I believe that we can all win together. You say, I guess I know Dave is. I'm sure I know he's got a lot going on with Daytona, but there's a point that he made in one of the videos where it's like, we need to talk about this more. I feel that, it's good that we're doing this. Like, again, I'm always grateful that you have me on and the things you're doing because it helps us all as a community, man. I believe that, I don't believe in competition. I do believe that, you should, look at yourself in the mirror and see what you can do to push forward. But I believe that, we all can rise together. I believe that, when someone's doing good, they're creating revenue to be put into something that, someone else is doing good, and it's pretty much a revolving door, and we all can succeed together. So I feel that rooting for everybody can play a role, because one person does good, they don't have what that person did good on, and they can either do trades or they can buy from that person, and it all creates us as a community. So like I know like Dave, Levinson made a good point, one of your videos saying that one of the reasons why he's on podcast is to talk about this, and I think that's what we should be doing because it is fun. It's exciting. Skinks are great. I enjoy them. They're like puppy dogs to me, man. They make me happy.
Oh, and we are seeing more and more still getting into them, so it's definitely helping. And plus being a great easy reptile with
Yeah.
always is a good thing.
Yep.
Um, have you have you noticed any like certain traits you want to start breeding for? Like, I know consistency was some of the main goals initially, but like, are you going to go for maybe some lighter westerns? You see some blotch with higher patterns or anything
Yeah,
like
so like, I mean, you make a great point because it was always just like just produce them, like because it's not easy. Well, it could be easy. I don't want to say that it's hard, but like it was at that point, just produce these guys. That's all I care about is just being able to produce them. But yeah, you're right. Like, like lighter. I think I posted on my Instagram. There's a nice baby that like I just posted that like is really light. I think that animal probably most likely going to keep. Now I hope to maybe sell a few westerns. We'll see. Blotched. I like some of the nice striping with the orange, like real orange and striping. That's something yeah, that one, yeah. That one's really light. And like the picture doesn't do it justice. Like it's like really light in person. So like, for instance, like, guys like Don Patterson, I mean, you see what some of the stuff he had, man. I mean, some of those westerns are insane. The Xanthic and then the hypo. I like the hypo one. That one to me is like sick. But again, it's all preference. So that's something that a project for him. And I always say like I told him this like out of all people like it's one guy that deserves to get that I guess lucky I guess but I think it's in his hands it's gonna do great. He's gonna do great things with them. But yeah, so like the Oxvitalis, lighter coloring, definitely. And like I already kind of, when I bought the group from Dave, there he kind of already had a generationally like lighter animals. So like now it's kind of being a little bit more passed on. And then my goal for the blotched is to get more like striping with like serious orange. But like to me it was like I'm grateful that I got that. I call her New Bloodline Girl. Um, that's her name because I before everything went CITES, I got one more female, um, and imported that, and she's had 2 litters of 5, and then this year a litter of 8, and like to me that bloodline is like it seems pretty prolific. So even just being able to work with that is it makes me happy.
well,
I
I
think
do.
no, I think you have one of my you have another bloodline, but it's I mean that line throws some really nice oranges.
Yeah, that one, she's got some phenomenal oranges on her.
Yeah, that was a year I did like I think the litter you got was like every baby was insane. So like I was like, all right, well I got part with one of these because I want to help Alex out, but can't keep them all. But yeah, it was like that whole litter was like really orange.
So as and I'm sure you get asked this one a lot by a lot of random people. As the success breeding increases, what year do you start releasing shinglebacks? Do you wait till you have like offer pairs?
Yeah, I would say probably in the next like few years, definitely. It just depends on production and because the only I mean I've so far I've had more single babies in a litter than two. So I, I would like to build my own kind of a group. I even think about trimming some of the collection down, like geckos and maybe some of the blotched but it's not a lot, not by a lot. But I definitely want to kind of grow the shinglebacks a little bit more and you know more to like do my best to establish them here too. I feel like if I were to release a lot, I think that trying to have a little bit of numbers can be beneficial. And kind of really have like a good sample size and then start to get going. But again, it's not easy with these guys. They only produce 1 or 2 babies. I haven't had a 3 baby litter yet. So, and most, like I said, most of it's all just ones.
Well, and the problem when you get bigger litters, you have more issues or more chances of issues. So
That's what I'm saying. I'd rather
better
have.
to have.
Go ahead, Alex. I think you're going to finish it for me.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's better to have one healthy than three get
Exactly.
stuck.
Well, it's not even stuck. It's like if you get 3 or 4, what happens is they're coming out smaller, and then you're playing the nursing game, and you might lose 2, and then you're back to that anyway. So it's like I would just rather have like one nice giant baby, or 2, solid sized babies. Like I think one of the girl. This is crazy. One of the females had, um, she was huge, but she had a baby. She had a baby. One baby at 139 grams, and I thought she was done. I'm like, that is a huge baby. Then had a baby at 74 grams, and then also an infertile ovum. I'm like, Jesus, how did you fit all that in there? So, which was like the first for me, because usually it's always like, if you have a baby over like 120 plus 130, it's usually just one single baby. Everything went into that baby. Or you had like, if you're having 2 babies, it's usually in that like, 75, 8 range, and then one at like 80, or like, something in between, like you're cutting it in half. But never had a 139 and then a 74 and then an infertile ovum.
No, the females after giving birth to Shinglebacks, do they look as like drained?
They look deflated,
Yeah.
100%. Like there's a huge difference, like compared to a lot of the other species. Like, I mean, actually, I can't really say that, because I think, I've seen some intermedia, I've seen Concordies, I've seen blotch kind of deflate, but I have a few that you're like, oh my God, like you are totally deflated.
And like I know, like some of the ones I've had really depend on the individual, like if they'll continue eating or not. But
Yeah, it's the same. Like you'll watch females like eat pretty much all the way through, or you know, um, you know, kind of stop feeding. That's the other thing, is like in the wild, like when they have limited access to food, and then they naturally, a lot of them, higher percentage, naturally stop eating. Like, does that play a role with like better birthing? Like think about it. In captivity, I actually still slow them down on eating, um, but I still feed them. They still get some food, and then they go off feed. But like their body was at perfection basically all the way through. But in the wild, they might miss food for like a solid month, and then have no appetite leading to like about to be birthing. So like does that play a role with easier birthing? It's just, this is all things we have to learn. So
after you see them breeding or introduce them yourself, do you increase the food you offer a bit or no?
wait, I'm sorry. When I see them,
So
say that
like
again.
after you start pairing, do you increase the food you offer at all? Like for the
Yeah,
intermediate, we'll try to bump them up.
yeah. So I do that. I do it for a small period of time. It's almost like I feel like I'm programming them to say, hey, there's plentiful. You could go through a gestation, but once they ovulate, right, and they start to, get babies, I feel like that's when I slowly wean off. Like I don't think it's necessary, because it's all about the beginning stages. Because if something's not perfect, they'll just reabsorb. I mean, not always the case, but I think that early on, I'm trying to kind of build their fat reserves a little bit, get them ready, and then also maybe program them. Do I believe that that is 100% factual, and that's but I feel like it could be like a good thinking on our scale, that hey, we're telling you that you're going to be okay. I'm building up your fat reserves. I'm doing all the things. Everything is where it needs to be to go through a gestation.
Oh, and it makes sense. Usually in the wild with scarcity, there's less born. They're gonna, instead of putting that energy to the next generation, they're gonna want to keep that energy to stay alive.
Yep. So
Um, you kind of hinted at it, like fine tuning your collection. do you have a percent like that you would go down to? 20% geckos, 30% shinglebacks, 50% hospitalis?
It's tough. I mean, I think it's more of a mental mindset than like to keeping more. So like as because think about it, when you're having success each year, I like for Taliqua, I don't think it's necessarily like cutting down. I think it's kind of keeping it at a certain quota type of thing. So like, I like next year comes, I might want to sell like a pair of proven adults. It's very possible because I have to keep a certain amount because if I keep keeping too many, it's going to be overwhelming on myself. And um, you know, I and now as far as like maybe geckos, I do believe I would like to trim that down a little bit. That's something I've been doing for like over 15, 16, 17 years. I think I can maybe trim a little bit down on that. But it would be like my kind of like grand scheme of things is like if I'm cutting my gecko collection down, that's money that's going to be used into building another facility. So like that's what's going to free up some space, but also bring some revenue to building a facility. So like if I do make that decision, it's not like I'm, you know, celebrating and oh, I made all this money. Like it's going to be used. That's the obviously it's going to help me with a lot of work on my hands, less work, and then also it's going to fund. So like anybody out there that purchases a gecko from me or even a skink, man, it really definitely helps a lot because it's funding. It's going to be funding that. Now, how long is it going to take? I don't know, but I want to make it. I don't want to make it chintzy. I want to make it the way that I feel will be good for them. So, like for instance, like design, it's like I want to have like a giant pit, you know, inside, and then a little separator that opens up into a greenhouse. Then have a side pit almost that's enclosed. That's literally just a humid box. And then I even think about putting little misters around the pit, like maybe two on the inside and then one on in the humid hide, so that it's spraying in there every once in a while. So and then there's a lot more going into it that I think that I'm going to be trying to do myself. So, but it's going to cost money, but I want to make sure it's done right.
Have you thought of like, and I'm sure part of this depends on the funds, like size you want to go?
Actually, it doesn't really necessarily the funds. It's more zoning. It's more the
Yeah,
township saying, yeah, no, So that's definitely one of those things where that's out of my control because if I'm allowed to do it, I'll say, hey, like maybe get an architect or somebody that says it might cost you this. I'll get that money. I myself will work very hard to get there, to make it right. Because that's my thing. It's like if I spend the amount of money I did, and same thing with Cutie Pie, I could have just let her pass and say, oh, I'm going to call it. But like, if I could spend the money I spent on these animals, I can spend the money on doing things right, meaning proper vets, having them in place, and then also having a standard for their care. I think that's the big goal of mine. But like as they say, like money's the root of all evil, and it unfortunately takes that to make it work. So because I do believe that if it wasn't the root of all evil, a lot of us keepers would be trying to do the best we can for them. It's just it's not easy.
yeah, it's you got to find that, we'll call it happy medium, and
Exactly.
it's really hard to get a happy medium at times.
Yeah.
And with so each individual pit, you would probably go bigger. Would you do it so you could have more? Like try to do trios
Yeah,
or
perfect. That's you hit it on the head. Is because I'm taking up more square footage, I can't do 1.1s everywhere. So it's going to be trios, and but I successfully have done that this year. I got to have a male get the job done between two females. So it's possible. So I believe that I could go along with that because that was the trial and error for this year was to say, hey, let's try trios and see if when I build this that it's going to be successful. Again, like everyone that's seen like the pit style setups I have, that's all temporary. That's just me trying to figure things out and see if it works. And so far, it has worked. So yeah, so I would like to go with trios. And then understanding, what females in their window, what males to put with, there is a little bit of a juggling act. Sometimes males fire and want to breed, and sometimes they don't. So it's understanding which males are pacing and showing all signs, and maybe doing some flip flopping around, and that's kind of what I've done here too. Or I've had success where I watch a male. I know I really do believe the female's in her window, and the male's just kind of like blah, I'm not doing anything. And then what do you know? You take that male out, bring a male that's pacing his cage like a maniac, throw him in there, and boom, job gets done. So that's why observing plays a big role too. So.
And I'm guessing yes when I ask this. That's with the Shinglebacks too. Like you've been fine swapping them. Like I know when I talked to Menno, he didn't really believe in the like monogamous mating for life thing. Like males will mate other ones.
Yeah, so I believe in compatibility, like being able to, get along. But even that, like I noticed my percentages of them doing okay together seems pretty good. That's my thought. That's what I feel. When you're doing the flip flopping, I've learned this myself. When you're doing the flip flopping, like just watch what's going on. Because what happens is, I've actually learned this from Dave and myself, that, maybe even giving a cage clean, which I'll be honest with you, I haven't done, or a soak on the female. Why? Because if it's an aggro male and you're doing that flip flop, that male smells the other male and might just attack the female or try to bite her, like if it would be another male. It's not, oh my God, as dangerous as you think, but just you gotta want to be mindful of that. Yeah. Or just observe, watch.
Um, One thing. So you mentioned, like the pits are temporarily, and we kind of talked about this the other day about like doing hinges on them. That way you could, if you wanted to, like sweep out the substrate or something like that. Do you think over brumation, if you had enough isopods, you'd actually have to do that? Like, or do you think it's beneficial to do that complete change out?
But what do you mean, like in the humid hide? Because you're saying
I guess the
isopods.
whole pit, or in general, like,
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I try to do a change out, clean, sanitize before winter or disinfect big time. Even what and anybody out there, like I would highly suggest never to have a humid hide during winter too, because that can kill your animal real quick. So yeah, like I think during winter, if I have humid hides, all that's getting cleaned out. Maybe I'll just put like dry shavings in if they want to go into there and hibernate or brumate. But yeah, I like to clean. I don't think maybe if I have the outside set up like during summer, if I have that the greenhouse, maybe that's something I can have like isopods, maybe some like native plants, like or some type of edible plant they can eat, and they can kind of whenever something drops or they can grab themselves and kind of feed themselves. Maybe that could be something I can do. We'll see. All options are on the table.
because like certain isopods will live down to that 50-degree temperature fine, but then they kind of eat less, so then bacteria can spike. That's why I kind of worried on.
Well, the thing is too, like in a sense, isopods need some type of moisture to live, and then what happens is if you're playing that game with having a ragusa or like blotch to kind of burrow where the isopods are, and that could be a big problem. And
Yeah,
then
I didn't think about
I
that.
think keeping it dry is probably a good idea during winter, but during during wake up months, that could be a good idea where you're not having to do too much. But I'd rather just keep it like this. I mean, it's not too hard to do, but like we were talking about, maybe some type of easy access, make a nice quick little swipe of the whole bedding and it's in, quick, vacuum in there and then, get shavings back in, like something like that could be good, but we'll see. It's all, just trying to plan everything out. I have plans and I have ideas, but it's, getting the funds, if I have that's why I think what also could play a role in selling a lot of gecko collection is, you know, using that towards the facility, but it could be a big deduction as well because it's a deduction for my business that I'm building some. So all that, if I get a boost in profit from the geckos, I could do it where I time it that year, sell a bunch, and then be able to use that into the building, and then use that as a deduction as well. So
And do you think you would start doing like more of the final stuff now, or you think you're going to wait till you move to Minnesota, or?
you're funny. Hey,
Or
Minnesota. Yeah, anybody who's breeding skinks in Minnesota, I mean, I feel like that's a good spot, because you're having I like that you're able to get it, being that you guys get so cold, you're able to, you know, give the animal their wants and needs during brumation, if you can.
yeah,
So
yeah, and it seems like no matter where you live, there's going to be pros and cons, and you
yeah, I
kind of.
mean, here it gets subtropical during summer, so those humidity spikes heavy, and actually it's what made me learn that shinglebacks can tolerate higher humidities because there's times out there where the adults are that it's 65% maybe, and if there's a rainstorm, it'll get up to 70 plus, and I've never had an issue, you know, never had an issue, you know.
Do you think it'd be worth having a dehumidifier on hand for in case you guys get a week-long storm, or you still think even then with all the heat from the like basking lights you'd be good?
Well, what I notice is airflow plays a big role. It plays a big role. So like when it's somewhat like, I feel if you got rain and it was cold, I feel like that's a bigger problem than you having rain in the summer, and what happens is the air conditioning kind of stays on now, because and it creates that airflow, and it does. I notice creates this cool airflow, and I noticed that maybe that could be a benefit too, but that's just, I guess you could say, speculation. But good flow, good airflow, good fans help. I just believe in the stagnant air with not good cage cleaning and disinfecting properly can play a big role in a lot of RI issues, I think.
With it getting as warm and humid, you just have mini splits pretty much in your setup, right? For overall.
I do have a big fan in there too, that when it gets crazy humid, I'll pop on, or like when it gets, what happens is like when we get like an insane, like heat wave, I'll like try to shut all the lights off in there, and then set the mini splits to like a very high temp, and then I have the fan just really circulating the air because sometimes it gets too hot. I don't want everything on in there. It's just sketchy.
Yeah, no, it's smart. And one thing it was TC I talked to before. He was thinking about doing like implementing days of shade, like 1 day a week he would have less lights or like less amount of time. I don't know if that would be worth trying, and maybe even to extend the warm up time. Something worth about trying. Maybe not worth changing too much now, being it's finally starting to consistently go.
Yeah, it's so hard, man, to find that happy medium. But like I understand it, like it makes sense, because like what we do in captivity isn't happening in the wild. I mean, they could have 5 days of just all clouds and rain, and never see the sun at all. And most of the time those animals are pretty much burrowed down. And I think we talked about this with Phil Tremper on a podcast that he stated that they go through an estivation. Really a lot of animals when it's peak summer, it's like winter, it's like summer's hibernation or brumation, and that's kind of what I do here now. I've learned that from Phil. It makes sense that try to work your ambient temperature, and shut all the lights off when it's really warm. And actually, on my timers, especially like the males, like I have like 3 or 4 hours a day, or maybe even something. I think it's right. I think right now it's like 5 hours of darkness. You know, they don't. They're not eat. They're in even like if you leave the lights on and you feed them, they don't even eat. They're hiding because it's just really it's too warm. So I just 5 hours a day, I just shut off the lights and let them go into their estivation process. And you watch them; they're not looking for basking; they're just down. They're like, all right, cool. And then once fall starts to approach, I start to turn the lights back on. Once they feel those cooler nights, I notice that they'll tend to start to pop out again, and then I start to kind of feed them a little more again, fatten them up before winter, and then get them going.
Do you offer anything special like pre-winter, like more variety or
like winter and winter and wake up? I do more protein. Like I
okay.
feel that coming out of winter boosts both male and female. So it boosts the male for when he needs to get breeding. You and I know, and a lot of people may be listening, that a lot of males, a fair amount, not all, will go off feed and they just want to breed. And they burn out and they get skinny quick. And then, females, you want to make sure that they're all amplified, ready to go for a gestation process. And then on the back end, you're going into winter. You want to make sure your males, get a little boost before and get ready before winter comes. And then same thing with females; they just have babies and say, "Hey, you want to breed them the next year?" Again, obviously, I would use your best judgment, and make sure that they look good. You're going to do the same. Might want to give them, some, a couple quail chicks or maybe like a medium sized mouse. Not freaking like overload it, but like a couple here and there lead up, and I think it's a little boost, a little help to fat storage because they do deplete a little bit going into when they're in winter. So it could definitely be, I think that's how I do it. But, after all said and done, like for instance, going into winter, they do need like a fasting period where you're not really feeding them that much. And you want to clear them out, and then, you know, um, I like to during summer slow things down. Midsummer and lead up to like gestation, or lead up to birthing for females. I'm only feeding them once a week.
so it's big and it makes sense kind of to nature. There's stuff's gonna start blooming, insects and everything's gonna start picking up. There's gonna be more food, then there's gonna
Yep.
be a little die off when it's well, I guess die off's not the word. Everything's hiding because it's so hot, but
Yep.
and then they
Well, I
start.
mean, I think the big thing is too is like when you wake up out of winter, when you're waking up out of winter, there's no vegetation yet. It still needs to have consistent temperature, warmer temperatures to kind of have some type of bloom. So most likely they're eating some type of protein source. And then as spring approaches, they're eating more of a varied kind of diet, more flowers. And I always watch like some videos where guys catch or not catch. They film shinglebacks. They every time they open their mouth, there's like some type of flower in their mouth. And I do believe I would assume during just as spring is kind of entering, those are not bloomed yet. So what are they eating? Right? They're gonna have. I would assume they eat some type of protein, and I wouldn't doubt it's naturally done, and it does help the gestation process. And then on the back end too, it's very possible as things are starting to die off that what's left is kind of more of a protein style, bugs or maybe some type of I don't know about rodents, but I don't know the data on that, but I guess it just makes sense.
I know the random like data ones I found of the wild. I know they do eat some, but the percentage wasn't a lot. But I really think probably depends on what they come across, because if they found enough rodents or whatever that they could easily get, I'm sure they would.
Well, the way they do those head waggles when you feed them a roach or a quail chick, the way they just slosh the food around, it's like they're killing a prey item, and that's
Yeah.
instinctual. They're all doing it, every single one. Like, there's theoretically no way you could tell me that they're just doing that because they're just going to be doing that to flowers. So I think that but I think overdoing it is not good either. I really believe that. Just like always feeding them. I'm not saying they only eat vegetables. That's definitely not true. But they're not only eating quail chicks or bugs. They're not specifically eating that. And I would tell anybody in captivity, like, you know, I believe if you're feeding them once or twice a week, like, I'm sorry, like, you're never gonna mimic Mother Nature. You're never. So I think combining food ingredients plays a bigger role in having that equal balance of nutrition than specifically just feeding them canned dog food or just quail chicks or just a banana every day or every other day or just a banana twice a week. That to me, like the same thing with the dog food concept. Like, I do believe if you're specifically just feeding like a canned dog food to, like, let's say Ragusa, though, more so than anything, I think that that's not good. I think that can have huge complications. But if you take, a canned dog food or canned cat food and then put it in a high percentage vegetable mixed diet where they're getting a heavy amount of veggies, but like there's that little percentage of protein, I think that's more of a balanced diet, and they kind of need that because if you're feeding them once or twice a week, you know, it's going to be helpful to bring a combination of nutrition and one plate. That's how I look at it. We can't mimic, what happens in the wild. In the wild, they're always moving. They're always moving. They're always, munching maybe on a couple things they can get that day, but it's like so low calorie. There's like nothing to it. And then the next day there might be a bigger calorie meal, or then there might be like 5, 7 days they don't go with food. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's like a 3-day window of like they're eating this, they're eating that. But there's usually a varied nutritional diet. Whereas we can't do that here because they're not moving. They're in the cage setup. They're not getting the proper exercise. We feed them too much. That's a huge problem, especially with Ragusa. All my opinion, but I'm sure a lot of people can think that it makes sense. That's just like my thought, and I'm sure there are a lot of other breeders out there that kind of have that thought too. Between all species, all subspecies.
For them, do you think they just have that slower of a metabolism, or it's just they need more
I,
fiber?
I I think it has to do with what's happening in their surroundings. Like it's not whatever's happening in their surroundings is never going to happen in captivity. So like, giant rainstorm comes for like 5, 7 days, they're going down somewhere and hiding. They might pop out a little bit here and there, but or if like a good cool front comes, a good cool front ain't going to come like that for us. I think we have a little more consistency. So I think there's much more obstacles that they're getting than what we would get in captivity. It's just flatlined. It's just pretty much the same routine. Obviously, if you're ever seasonal changing, yeah, the seasonal change, yes, but there's so much going on out there. They get a hot spell for like 2 weeks. What if it's like hot for literally 2 weeks? You're not going to see them. I mean, anybody can go out in the United States and go on a very hot day. You're not finding much anything, and I think that's what it is. I think it's the obstacles that go on in Mother Nature that take away the certain things that we're doing here, but we can never mimic what it is out there, but we could do our best to try. And I think having a mixed diet full of different nutrition could be pretty beneficial.
Now, with of the Australian blue tongues you worked with, what would you consider the top pet?
I mean, I'm sure you probably know. It's the Ragusa, man. They're puppy dogs. Actually, hold on. My headphones is. Do you hear me?
Yep.
All right, cool. Yeah, my headphones crapped out, so I'm gonna let them charge a little bit, so you can hear me. Good.
Yep, you're good.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I would say the Ragusa. They're Ragusa. Blotched are there. Blotched can be a little more hissy pissy. They're like I'm sure you've probably experienced it. They can be a little hissy pissy, but they're still pretty chill. I would say closest would probably be Skincoides, and Ragusa for like ultimate like pet. But and again, I think blotch too. Occipitalis, they're a little more like, hey, I don't want to be held too much type of thing. They're more like visually cool. I think they're the ultimate hunter, in my opinion. Like you could tell that like food's hard where they come from. You could see it. So I think if you like enjoyment out of that, like I have some animals that like you start waggling like a quail, they go nuts. I mean, most of them do, but yeah, definitely. I feel like yeah. So probably if I were to pick, Skincoides, and the Ragusa, Shingleback.
See, I'm I always got I don't have a ton on this from like the random Australian people I talked to after the Shinglebacks. A lot thought the blots were calmer. Like,
I think I would say it's there, but like I don't know. I feel like there's some blotched. I mean, but again, there could be some Ragusa that get a little pissy, but or like there's some Ragusa, like the Western forms that like don't like to be messed with. Like they're not trying to bite you with this. They don't want to be near you, and they like to like tend to pee and poop on you. But I think the Aspera are actually a little more chill than the Western forms. But blotch, yeah, I don't know, because I see a bunch of blotch that can be little. Excuse me, French, but like little bastards, man.
yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, everyone is a mixed bag, and I don't have a lot, like a ton, to be like, oh yeah, like there might be like there could be higher percentage of this being nicer and lower percentage the other way around. So
I do think some selective breeding goes into that too.
yeah, because I have some bloodline Ragusa. Like I have a bloodline I got from my buddy, that he kind of bred out, and then I got, and like I'm noticing, like you said, the breed of that family tree, they're all very shy and like timid and like run away, especially the babies. Like you can't grab them. And then even the parents are like kind of, they don't like to be touched at all. But they don't bite you, but they just really freak out. Like you go into the pit, they start spazzing. Whereas a lot of other species, they're fine.
Do you think, and it's hard, I know, with amount of time can play a toll. Do you think part just, I don't know, like, I know they can be calmer, but I don't know the best way, but like, do you think it's just because not dedicated enough time to that, or it's just individuals?
Oh, that's a great point. I think you're right. I think like if I were to specifically hold that certain animal a bunch of times, because you do make a really good point. Because like for instance, like the baby that I nursed back, it really wasn't nursing back. Like that baby was kind of fine, but I kind of gave it a boost. But it was very spazzy. But every time I kept feeding it and feeding it, it started to realize like I'm doing a good thing, and it started to kind of trust me a little bit more, and it's like used to it. Actually, I have a buddy that if you see like I have a buddy that like kind of films me, and like one of the videos I'm gonna try to do this week is trying to show people that how to like hand feed them in a sense, and it's that specific animal that's pretty much used to it now, but it was really scared when I would grab it. It would try to run out of my hand. It would squirm in my hand. Now it's like, oh, I know what's going on, like give me some food.
Because like in some with we're still learning on intelligence, but it does seem like there's that definite learned behavior where they're picking up on the cues and
Hold on, I'm trying to put my headphones back in.
oh, no worries.
Yeah, because I'm trying to just hold up. Is it working?
I could hear you.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, it was trying to connect, and like it was trying to connect to it, and I couldn't hear you, and I'm like, thought it would just kind of link, but it worked. So go ahead. Sorry.
Um, oh, just it. It seems like overall reptiles they do have more intelligence than a lot people suspect. So they
Well,
are learning on those cues, I think.
well, I think this is a great like point, and I think you would agree that like, and I use this as an example. Like, I just believe that like we're such in the premature stages of like domesticating reptiles. Like, you gotta realize we've had dogs domesticated for thousands of years. Literally thousands of years, dog have been, bred. We've been in this hobby for what, like 100, if that? Like, so I feel
Yeah.
like I wonder what 50 years, another 100 years, 300 years, 400 years can possibly bring. What's going to happen? It's definitely going to change. There's no way that, I feel, like animals are still coming, some imports are still coming, and this is just separated from the wild of like, stuff from Indonesia and like, different places that like, that people still import stuff. Like, we haven't even separated from that yet, you know? We haven't even domesticated reptiles. So just imagine what like 400 years brings, 1,000 years brings of like that specific animal, not just because I don't know, there's still those first generations that'll come in, but I'm talking like a specific animal that has bred in captivity for 400 to 1,000 years. We haven't even gotten there yet. So like, it's just to imagine how much a reptile, what can be the outcome of domesticating a reptile. And I wouldn't doubt there's data to show that that's already been some significant changes. And you're talking like 20 years, 30 years working with that animal. That's nothing. So like it's interesting to think like that.
I'd be curious how many generations too. It it's kind of hard to tell with, like you said, with dogs and stuff. It's been thousands of years, so they've had countless generations of adapting or learning throughout that.
Or a lot breeding for specific traits, and like you said, like we might separate this very shy bloodline into something that's a little different and more calm and chill, and then you start line breeding those traits. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's just very interesting, to think that we this hobby has been probably touched at 100 years. Isn't that
Well, in
crazy?
in those 100 years too, it's not been a consistent breeding. You've had world wars that some
Stop
people
that.
might have been breeding some stuff, but yeah, they're more focused on living than
Now think
manufacturing.
about this. At a commercial scale, like social media scale, we haven't even what 20 years, 15 years. That's like nothing.
Yeah.
So like imagine what so many generations and you know all these 100 years, 500 years, who knows, obviously we won't be here, but it's just interesting to think like how like we're such in the pioneer stages of like the wild west of trying to figure herpetoculture, and I think now it's really starting to get traction, and it's just so interesting. It's interesting to me, you know.
With certain industries don't always work together the best, like say, certain zoos and
Yeah, I
the
know.
hobbyists, but you kind of have, like you mentioned, a good network of vets so far. Do you think that more zoos would want to reach out and work with hobbyists over time, breeders over time,
Ooh, I mean,
if it benefits them?
I would absolutely hope so. To be honest with you, I think we need to find a way to come together, and I feel like one side has, I don't know. I don't know if I want to get so much into detail with this because I have so many mixed feelings. But I guess because I don't want to have any type of friction, but I just do believe there needs to be some type of correlation. I feel like sometimes there's so much hate towards the private sector. I don't want to say hate, but like I don't know, a certain like it's like when you go to school and there's like the peer group, the people that are like, oh, like I'm going to like this crazy good school, but like I don't know, there's other good people out there too, and like I think that we could play such a benefit, and I think there's like things that can be in place for us to all work together. I know, like, yeah, we make money in this area, but not all people. Like, for instance, like, and I don't want to be biased, but like, a lot of the money I get, like, I want to improve everything for the animals. And like, I worked at a cancer hospital. I saw people, dying of all ages, and I want to live the American dream and do what I love. So like, yeah, I gotta make money to pay the bills, and so do zoos. Zoos, they rely on people coming into their place or facility to pay. Whereas like, yeah, we need to sell animals to improve certain things that are going on here as well. So there's like somewhat of a similarity. And then like the whole conservation thing, I feel like we got to get into our heads, and if we don't get like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I don't want to sound too like arrogant or like a certain way, but like if we don't put it in our heads that conservation's there's a very big possibility that's not going to be real no more. Like there might be a moment where there is no wild. Not saying that that's I had that mindset of like reality don't care about our feelings. So I think we have too much emotional concept into those things, and I feel like, in my opinion, there's a probability, not saying it's going to happen, but conservation might not be real, meaning like there might not be no wild at all left. And we're talking about 500 years. So if we don't accept that the private sector and zoos play a large role in what keeps these animals going, I think we should have that in the back of our heads that, conservation or, trying to help wild population. Seems to me a lot of developers don't really care. Actually, they use it against us. Oh, it's the private sector. It's this. They're ruining the land, but we're going to chop it down anyway and start building more. And seems like there's no care in that. So I feel like if we got to get past that area, that there might not be a such thing as conservation. And there's roles that could be played and benefit, to try to help too. That we could play a role. Like for instance, I was like talking to a friend about this. Like we could do it like I hope I don't ruffle any feathers and people be like, oh, like what are you doing? But like you know for instance, if someone came up to me and was like, hey, like you could do what you're doing, we love that you're breeding and you're selling animals, that's fine, but like we need you to breed this animal for no money at all. Like we think that you have some type of skill set and that you can obviously segregate a room. It doesn't make a sense in the scale of like the way the protocols are with zoos and like you need to keep things a certain way. I'm just like kind of throwing it out there. Like we need you to create this room and you have to try to help breed these animals and you're not going to get any money for it. I would do it. It would be freaking awesome to be like, hey, I'm helping this population. Like I believe that, that a lot of us keepers would feel honor in that. So I just feel like, the private sector needs to stop, like people, a lot of other people need to stop hating the private sector so much. I think, yeah, like there's a lot of, bad people out there too, but I think there's a lot of good and they want to do good. I think that, and I think one day there's a possibility of, you know, making laws that make us not allowed to have animals, I think can really be a big problem if one day that there's no more wild animals. And then because you got a little mad at the private sector for doing certain things. Obviously, maybe there's certain protocols and certain things that we need to do that could be beneficial. But that's how I look at it. I don't know. I think I probably just went on a little bit of a rant, but hope that makes sense.
No, it does, with a lot of stuff with a, in the US in general, we send stuff overseas and we expand there for, we'll take the land at a cheaper cost, and then you lose the wild because they pop up a factory
Yep.
and
And then
it
you're
just
you're
keeps
getting you're
growing and
you're
growing.
you're getting mad at the guy that maybe keeps some snakes in tubs, and it's like, oh, because he's the bad guy, because he's just looking at it as it's money. I just think it's wrong. I believe that Shinglebacks, for example, I've lost so much money, and trying to get them established and again, even like the surgery that I had to get done, I'm not, I've put money aside to do what I can to establish any type of businessman or person that, wants to get, rich quick, I think that, they wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And then a lot of that money is being saved to try to expand and build something better, And I think that I just think that we should, perceive or like not always bash so hard on each other. I feel like I would love to see, and I think there is some zoos that correlate with some of the private sector, but I believe that we could both be one, and I think it could benefit, it could benefit the wild as well. I mean, if there's some type of small tax, like imagine we sold an animal and you had a 1% tax on the animal you sold, or a 0.50% tax on the animal you sold, and that goes into conservation. I feel like I wouldn't doubt people would do that. And how much money you would create from that? I mean, think about it. 0.50% of a sale you make goes into conservation. I bet you if you put that a lot out there, I'm obviously that's just like it's a small number, but like, even if it was a percent, I wouldn't doubt some people would do that. Hey, like you could keep this animal, but you got to put 1% on every sale you make, towards, animals.
Well, and that was an idea I thought of with, the shutdown of like exporting of stuff and the reasoning them wanting to save the Australian animals, with every animal you export, $5 goes towards conservation, and they, because you got to pay for each one you would export, so they just toss it on top of it.
No, and I wouldn't doubt for us to be able to keep animals, and this is what we have to do. But I think that makes me think like, is there really a lot of care? Like, the higher power or the people at the top, So I just feel like we got to stop hating within, I think that we can all be as one, like you said, for instance, the vets I work with, where it's, helpful to their practice. It's helpful for myself to make my animals be okay. And I think it's one of those things. And if there's any zoo out there that I would love to, I would feel honored. It would be cool to be able to be like, hey, let's like work together. If you need something, like we could do a trade or swap a bloodline or, but I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of things in place that kind of stops that. And I feel like there's, the private sector is like, that the hobbyist, I even hate that name sometimes, the hobbyist, because we do things that not a lot of people could do. And, it feels good when you do them. So, we could play a role, so I'm sure I'm ranting and hopefully I don't want to make it where there's hate on both sides. Like it's like one of those we all can get along, and sometimes I wish that it is could be that way.
Well, yeah, and with growth, if we all work together, we could do a lot better things. Is the main thing. We all love the animals. The zookeepers love the animals. The vets love the animals too.
Yeah, I mean I do, I guess maybe in the private sector too, like having a standard, you know, could be, beneficial too, saying that we're doing it the right way. And there are a lot of people that are, you know. Everyone's trying to improve. I think there's been a lot of improvements than there was, 10, 15 years ago. There's always new innovative ways of doing things. So it's not like we're all just doing things the wrong way and, thinking strictly about money.
It's some of that's perception too
Yeah.
with news. They could tailor it a certain way, and at least now with social media, it's a little easier to get some stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it has like the double-edged sword because, there's also the people that show things the wrong way and it has, a negative effect on the hobby as well.
Yeah.
But so that's why I say, like, I think that, there are good people out there too. So if we're just letting the bad guys show things on YouTube and the good guys don't do anything, I think that's a big problem. Whereas social media helps where you can see the good guys, and they are doing things the right way. I think it could be beneficial. I think it shows that there are good people out there too. We're not just doing stunts with animals to make ourselves get more views.
Yeah, and you especially, I don't know, better, you put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. You're showing that you're doing good for the animals, you're trying your best, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all you can hope for.
Yeah, and you hope other people that maybe make laws see, and say, hey, like for instance, like the videos I did with like starting off with Gary and then Tiki's came over. A lot of that's doing that to say, hey, like this is kind of the standard, and it could be that way, and it even could improve, and there are people willing to do it. So
I I think that was probably a good way to wrap it up. We
yeah,
hit a lot of the major things.
yeah, 2 hours. Wow.
Um, if anyone, when the time's right, whether someone's looking into getting a gecko as you downsize, or once you start letting a couple skinks go, where's the best place for people to reach you?
Johnny Rax is yeah, Johnny underscore Rax RHACS, like my Instagram, and then obviously like my Facebook is Johnny Felicetti, it's like the name that you see there. But yeah, I should have some blotched available, and a select few of the westerns. But I had 9 baby blotch born, so I would definitely probably sell a few of those, for sure.
Well, thank you again for coming on, John. I know I'm gonna have to do a round 3 one of these times.
Yeah, I gotta get Dave on. I'm sure he's in Daytona. It's probably hard for him, but it would be cool to talk to him as well.
Yeah, I kept peeking to see if he was gonna pop in, so unless I missed him, he must have got busy.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, I'm sure. Yeah, but and again, I do also want to appreciate you. The things you do for us, and just getting some guys on talking about skinks, and it's more specific, and it's a good podcast, and I appreciate you willing to do it.
Well, thank you, John, for the kind words. I hope you all have a great rest of your night, and if you didn't, hit like and subscribe.